The brochure was tucked under a cloth napkin, like she was embarrassed by it. But she wasn't embarrassed. She'd planned the whole thing. I noticed it the second I sat down. A trifold pamphlet, glossy, the kind with stock photos of silver-haired women doing watercolor in sunlit common rooms. Maple Ridge Retirement Village, where every day feels like home. I picked up my coffee and didn't say a word. I waited. My daughter, let's call her what she was that morning, a stranger wearing my daughter's face, unfolded her napkin and smiled at me across the table, like she was about to deliver wonderful news. "We found a place, Mom. We toured it last week. You'd love it." I took a sip of my coffee. It was too hot, but I didn't put it down. "Did you?" I said. It wasn't a question. I should tell you a little about myself, because this story doesn't make sense without it. My name is Elaine. I'm 68 years old. I live in a 4-bedroom house in Oakville, Ontario, about 40 minutes from Toronto, on a street lined with maple trees that go orange and red every October in a way that still stops me cold even after 31 years of watching it happen. My husband, Ray, and I bought this house in 1993, the year before our daughter was born. We painted the upstairs hallway 3 times before we agreed on the color. We replaced the kitchen floor twice. We planted 2 apple trees in the backyard that now produce more Cortlands every September than any 2 people could ever eat. Ray passed, unexpected, the kind that doesn't give you time to say what you need to say. I won't pretend his death didn't change me, because it did. But what it didn't do, what I want to be very clear about, was break me. I grieved. I am still grieving, in the way you grieve someone you spent 34 years with. But I also got up every morning. I kept the house. I joined a walking group on Tuesday and Thursday mornings. I took a watercolor class at the community center, which, I'm aware, is ironic given what comes later. I booked a trip to Portugal that I had always told myself we'd take someday, and I went alone, and I cried in a cafe in Lisbon. And then I ordered the bacalhau and looked out at the river and felt, for the first time since the funeral, something close to grateful. I was not a woman in decline. I was a woman in motion. My daughter's name is Stephanie. She's 41. She works in marketing and lives about 20 minutes away with her husband, Craig, and their 2 kids, Ellie and Jonah, who are 9 and 6 and who I adore completely and without reservation. Stephanie and I were close once. I mean that genuinely. There was a time when she would call me on the way home from work just to talk, not about anything, just to talk. She has her father's laugh and my stubbornness, and for most of her life, I thought that combination was something wonderful. Craig, I liked less, but I kept that to myself. He is a man who talks about money the way other men talk about sports. Constantly, with great authority, regardless of whether anyone has asked. He'd been in real estate development for a while, then pivoted to something involving short-term rental properties, then something else. There was always a next thing with Craig. I don't think Ray ever fully trusted him, but Ray was polite in the way that men of his generation were, which meant he kept it between us. I found out in March that Craig's latest venture had collapsed. I didn't hear it from Stephanie. I heard it from my neighbor Bev, whose brother-in-law is an accountant, who had apparently heard it through a series of connections I never fully traced. When I asked Stephanie about it directly, she said things were a little tight right now and changed the subject. That was in March. The brochure appeared in May. We were at a cafe in Burlington, neutral territory, Stephanie had suggested, which should have told me something. My son, Andrew, was there too, which was unusual. Andrew lives out in Kelowna, and we talk on the phone every couple of weeks, but we don't often all sit down together outside of holidays. He'd driven out the previous evening, he said, to spend some time. I looked at him across the table. He's 38. Looks more like Ray every year. Same jaw, same way of rubbing the back of his neck when he's uncomfortable. And I thought, you know something I don't know. Stephanie waited until the food arrived to produce the pamphlet. She placed it on the table beside my plate with both hands, like an offering. "We've been worried about you, Mom." "Who is we?" I said. "All of us." She gestured at Andrew. He looked at his eggs. "You seem tired," she said. "You've seemed tired for a while. And the house, it's a lot for one person." I looked at the pamphlet, Maple Ridge Retirement Village. Monthly starting rate, $4,800. I turned it over. There were testimonials. Moving here was the best decision I ever made. Patricia, 74. I'm not tired, I said. I went to Portugal in February. I walk 5 kilometers every Tuesday and Thursday. That's great, Mom. That's really great. But what? Stephanie looked at Craig. I hadn't noticed Craig until that moment. He was sitting at the end of the table, slightly back, as if he wanted to be adjacent to this conversation rather than in it. The house is worth a lot, he said. More than it was when you and Dad bought it. The market in Oakville. I know what the market in Oakville is doing, I said. I live there. Right. Of course. We just thought, if you sold now, you'd be very comfortable. Maple Ridge is a wonderful facility. I've looked into the financials. There's an investment component, actually, if you structure the sale proceeds a certain way. Craig. I said his name and he stopped. Are you telling me how to invest my money? Silence. Andrew finally looked up. Mom, we're not trying to pressure you. We just want to make sure you're taken care of. I am taken care of, I said. I take care of myself. You're alone in a 4-bedroom house. I have 2 apple trees and a walking group and a watercolor class. I am not alone, Andrew. I am a person living a full life. He looked at his eggs again. I picked up the pamphlet and I set it back down in the center of the table, spine up, like I was closing a conversation. I finished my coffee. I did not touch my food. When we hugged goodbye in the parking lot, Stephanie held on a beat longer than usual, and I thought, this isn't over. I was right. Let me tell you what I did in the 2 weeks after that brunch, because it matters. The morning after, I called my lawyer. Her name is Janet, and she has handled my family's legal matters for over 15 years. I told her what had happened. I told her about Craig's financial situation as I understood it. I told her about the pamphlet. I told her that Craig had mentioned structuring the proceeds of a house sale. Janet listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always valued about her. Do you have a current will? She asked. Yes. Updated 2 years ago, after Ray passed, power of attorney. I have a continuing power of attorney for property and a personal care directive, both in Ray's name. Obviously, those need updating. Yes, she said. They do, and I'd suggest we do that quickly. We met the following Thursday. I revoked the existing POA documents. I appointed my oldest friend, Louise, 67 years old, retired physiotherapist, sharp as anyone I know, as my attorney for property. For personal care, I appointed my brother Tom, who lives in Guelph and who has never particularly liked Craig and has never pretended otherwise. Janet also walked me through a document called a title alert, a service through the province that notifies you if anyone attempts to register a change to your property title without your knowledge. I enrolled that same day. Then I called the bank. I made an appointment with my financial advisor and reviewed every account, every investment, every registered plan. I took Craig off a joint account that he had technically been authorized on. A holdover from a home renovation project 3 years ago that I had simply never thought to clean up. I thought about it now. Then I went home and I sat at Ray's old desk in the study and I pulled out every document that had anything to do with the house. The deed, the mortgage discharge, the property tax records, the insurance policy, the MPAC assessment, and I put them in one folder, and I put that folder in the fireproof lockbox in the closet that Ray had bought in 1997 and that I had always thought was slightly excessive. I thought about Ray then. I thought about how he would have handled that breakfast, and I knew, with complete certainty, that he would not have been as composed as I was. He would have said something direct and irrevertible before the eggs arrived. He would have been right anyway. I didn't regret being composed, but I was also not done. Here is where I should explain something. Nice, I summed. Stephanie brought that pamphlet. She wasn't just worried about me. I understand that now. I think I understood it even then, sitting across from her in that cafe, watching Craig study the far wall like he found it fascinating. The house, my house, the one with the October maples and the Cortland apples and the hallway we painted 3 times, is worth somewhere around $1.4 million in the current market. I know this because I had it assessed when I refinanced the mortgage after Ray passed, and I know this because Craig knows it, And I know Craig knows it because he brought it up at a family dinner 18 months ago and then tried to make it sound casual. The plan, as far as I have been able to piece it together, was this. I would agree to move to Maple Ridge. The house would go on the market. The proceeds, minus Maple Ridge fees, would sit somewhere accessible. Craig had apparently told someone. I found out later. It was Stephanie's cousin, who told Stephanie's aunt, who told Bev, who told me over the fence one evening in April that he had an opportunity that needed a significant capital injection and that he was working on it. He did not specify where the capital was coming from. I have no way to prove that Craig intended to get his hands on my money. What I can tell you is that when I walked through the arithmetic, the sequence of events made a shape that was not flattering to him. I also called the bank and asked, hypothetically, what documentation would be required for someone other than the registered owner to obtain a home equity line of credit against a property in Ontario. The answer, as I expected, is that it cannot be done without either joint ownership or a valid, properly executed power of attorney from the registered owner. The existing POA I'd revoked had technically named Craig as an alternate, buried in a clause I hadn't fully read. I read it that afternoon. Janet told me it had never been activated, but it could have been. That's the part that kept me up at night. I want to be fair to Andrew. He drove out from Kelowna because his sister called him and told him she was worried about their mother. That part, I believe, was genuine. Andrew is not a strategic person. He is someone who, when told there is a problem, drives across 3 provinces to deal with it, which is a quality I mostly admire. What Andrew didn't do was ask me if there was a problem. He showed up to the solution before he'd looked at the situation. That's a different kind of failure, and it's one I think he understood by the end. He called me 3 days after the brunch. I want to talk to you, he said. Just us. All right. I think I mishandled things the other morning. You did, I said. But I know why. She said you were forgetting things, that you'd left the stove on twice. I was quiet for a moment. I left the stove on once, Andrew. In January, I made myself a cup of tea at 10 at night and got distracted by something on the phone and went to bed. The next morning I noticed it and turned it off. The house was fine. I was fine. I paused. Has she told you other things I've supposedly forgotten? Another pause. She mentioned you forgot about Jonah's birthday. I didn't forget Jonah's birthday. I sent his card on the right day. I called in the morning. Asked Stephanie to show you the texts. The silence that followed lasted long enough that I knew he was thinking. Mom, he finally said. Yes. I'm sorry. I know you are, I said. I need you to be more careful next time about what you agreed to without asking me first. He stayed in Oakville for 4 more days. He fixed the eavesdrow on the north side of the house that had been pulling away since the ice storm in February. He ate dinner with me every night, and we watched old episodes of a detective show we used to watch together on Sunday nights when he was in high school. He didn't bring up Maple Ridge again. On his last morning, he stood in the kitchen drinking coffee while I made toast, and he said, very quietly, Craig has them in a bad spot, doesn't he? I think so, I said. I'm sorry she didn't just ask you. So am I said. So am I. The second conversation with Stephanie happened on a Saturday, about 3 weeks after the brunch. She called and asked if she could come by. She had Ellie and Jonah with her, which I noticed, and which I suspected was intentional. The children as a kind of emotional buffer. The kids went out back to see the apple trees. I could hear Jonah's voice through the kitchen window, asking if the apples were ready yet. Stephanie sat down at the kitchen table and folded her hands in front of her, and I recognized the posture because she does it when she's about to say something she's practiced. We need to talk about the house, she said. I know, I said. I know you don't want to hear this, but, Mom, it's too much. The upkeep alone, I had the roof assessed last fall. It's good for another 15 years. The furnace is 5 years old. The eavesdrow on the north side was just repaired by your brother. I kept my voice even. What specifically concerns you? She opened her mouth and then closed it. Is it the house? I said, or is it Craig's investment opportunity? The color left her face. Bev, I said simply. Bev should mind her own. Bev is my neighbor and my friend, and she told me what she heard because she was concerned about me. I set down my tea. Stephanie, I love you. I want you to hear that before I say anything else. I love you, and I love your children, and I would do almost anything for you. But I will not sell my house to solve a problem Craig created. That is not something I am willing to do. She was quiet for a long moment. He didn't ask you to do that, she said, but her voice had lost its footing. He didn't ask me directly, I agreed. No. The kids came back. Inside then, Ellie's hair full of bits of dried grass, Jonah holding a green apple that was absolutely not ready yet, and absolutely going to give him a stomachache. I made them hot chocolate. We talked about school. Stephanie stayed for an hour and a half, and when she left she hugged me in a way that felt like an apology, though she didn't say the words. That was okay. I didn't need the words right then. I needed her to understand that I had seen what was happening, that I had taken steps, and that the house, and my life in it, was not a resource available for someone else's problems. What I hadn't told Stephanie yet, what I had been sitting on for 2 weeks, was what Janet had found. When Janet reviewed all the documents I'd brought in, she flagged something in the property records. 3 months earlier, in February, while I was in Lisbon looking at the river, someone had attempted to run an inquiry on my title. It wasn't a change registration, just an inquiry, the kind a mortgage broker might run when exploring a client's options. The inquiry had been flagged automatically because of the title alert I'd enrolled in. But the notification had gone to an email address I rarely checked, and I hadn't seen it until Janet pointed me at it. The inquiry came from a brokerage Craig had used before. I'm not going to speculate beyond what I can demonstrate. What I can say is that the inquiry existed and that it was run before the brunch, before the pamphlet, before any of the conversations in which I was being asked to think about my future and the burden of a large house. Someone was exploring options before they'd asked me anything. Janet advised me to document everything and to say nothing about this specific finding until she had reviewed my options. She also reminded me, gently, that an inquiry is not a crime. But it's a pattern, I said. It's consistent with one, yes, she said. I called Tom that evening and told him everything. Tom, who has a gift for cutting through to the essential thing, listened for 10 minutes and then said, "What do you need?" "Nothing yet," I said. "But I need you to know, so that if something happens to me and someone tries to tell you I made decisions freely, you'll know the context." "I know the context," he said, "and nothing is going to happen to you. But I'm writing all of this down." "Me too," I said. The family dinner happened on a Sunday in late June at Stephanie's house. She invited Andrew to come back out, and he drove out again, which tells you something about Andrew. There was roast chicken and a nice Niagara Peninsula Riesling, and Ellie and Jonah were excused from the table early to watch something upstairs, which in retrospect I think Stephanie arranged on purpose. Craig was quiet through most of dinner. He is a man who performs confidence the way some people perform health. Very successfully when things are going well, and then very obviously when they aren't. He ate his chicken and asked Andrew about the Okanagan wine situation, which is a topic Andrew can sustain for almost any length of time. After dinner, when the dishes were cleared and the kids were definitely occupied upstairs, Stephanie poured everyone more wine, and Craig leaned forward with his elbows on the table and said, "Elaine, we owe you an honest conversation." "Yes," I said. "You do." I watched him recalibrate slightly. He hadn't expected agreement. "We've been going through a rough stretch," he said. "I think you know some of that." "I know enough." "Right." He cleared his throat. "There's an opportunity that I think is genuinely strong, but we need liquidity that we don't currently have. And I know that this isn't fair to ask, but we've been thinking about whether the house might make sense to revisit. As a conversation. Not pressure." He raised his hands briefly. "Just a conversation." I looked at him. I looked at Stephanie. I looked at Andrew, who was looking at the tablecloth. I reached into my bag and took out a folder. In the folder was a copy of the updated will, a copy of the revised power of attorney, naming Louise and Tom, a copy of the title alert enrollment confirmation, a copy of the mortgage document showing the house was owned fully and outright in my name, and a single printed page from my financial advisor's office, showing, with identifying details removed, that my own finances were structured, deliberate, and not dependent on any decisions Craig was hoping I would make. I placed the folder in the center of the table. "I want you to see this," I said, "because I want this conversation to be fully honest, as you suggested. The house is mine. The decisions about the house are mine. I have updated all of my legal documents, and I have spoken to my lawyer and my financial advisor and my brother, who is now my attorney for property." I looked at Craig. "There is nothing available here for the opportunity you're describing. That door is not open." Craig's face did something complicated. Stephanie said, very quietly, "Mom, I am not punishing you," I said. "I'm not angry. Well, I am a little angry, but that's not why I'm doing this. I'm doing this because I need you to know where I stand, and I need to know that you know, so that we can stop having this conversation in the way we've been having it and start having it honestly." Andrew looked up then. He met my eyes, and I saw something in his face that I recognized. The same look Ray used to give me when he knew I was right and he hadn't gotten there fast enough himself. "The house is yours, Mom," he said. "Yes," I said. "It is." Craig pushed back from the table and said he was going to get some air. He was outside for about 10 minutes. I don't know what he did out there. When he came back, he sat down and said nothing further about the opportunity, the liquidity, or Maple Ridge Retirement Village. That was 7 months ago. Stephanie and I still have dinner together. It took a few weeks for things to feel normal, or a version of normal, and there are things we still don't say out loud. She has not apologized, not in a direct, named way, but she shows up differently than she did. She asks about the walking group. She asks about the watercolor class. Last month, she brought Ellie and Jonah over on a Saturday morning, and we all picked the last of the Cortland apples together and made a pie in the afternoon, and nobody mentioned anything about the house being too much for one person. I notice when something doesn't need to be said. Craig is still working on whatever he's working on. I don't ask. Stephanie doesn't volunteer. They seem to be managing. I hope they are. I mean that without reservation. I hope they find their way through, because they are my daughter's family, and they are my grandchildren's parents, and I want their lives to go well. But not with my house. Not with my money. Not with decisions made over my head about my life. Andrew came back in October for Thanksgiving. He brought a bottle from a winery near Kelowna, the good one, not the one you buy to be polite. We sat on the back porch after dinner while the kids were inside and the maples were doing their thing, that October orange, the light going low, and he said, "You know, Dad would have just told Craig to go to hell at the cafe." "Yes," I said. "But your way was better. It was more durable," I said. "That's not quite the same thing." He laughed. He sounds like Ray when he laughs, which is both one of the hardest and one of the best things in my life right now. I looked out at the apple trees. Bare now, the last fruit long gone, but solid, deep-rooted, not going anywhere. 31 years of October in this yard. I picked up my wine. "Your father bought this house for us," I said. "I kept it for me. That feels right to me." Andrew nodded. "Yeah," he said, "it does."